A whole civilization will die tonight. Hitler never said that. No head of state in the history of the world ever said that. Civilization had to wait literally thousands of years until today, April 7th, 2026, at 8:06 a.m., for a head of state to say and threaten a whole civilization will die tonight. No cruel king ever threatened that. No mass murdering tyrant anywhere in the world ever said that or even thought it was possible. And so the United States of America now must live with the permanent stain on our history that we are the only country in the world who has produced a head of state who said a whole civilization will die tonight. And with that statement, it could not be more tragically clear now that a whole civilization has already died. The whole civilization, beginning with the model of the British Parliament, leading to the first independent American government formed under the Articles of Confederation, followed by the Constitution that wrote the presidency into existence, and nearly 250 years of the American presidency, all of that whole civilization forming the presidency died with the elevation of Donald Trump to the presidency a second time, proving that it wasn't just an electoral college accident the first time. The country that claimed so self-righteously to be the conscience of the world, and sometimes, in some ways, came very close to reaching that ideal, elected a president who had been convicted of business fraud in covering up payments to a porn star in a failed attempt to keep her quiet about his sexual relationship with her while his third wife was still nursing his youngest child. A man who was indicted and criminally charged with violations of the Espionage Act and illegal possession of classified documents. A man who was indicted for conspiracy against the United States of America, for trying to overthrow a presidential election when that man was elected president of the United States the second time. The very fabric of the civilization that knitted the Constitution into an acceptable form of government for 13 states with varying and sometimes conflicting interests, and delivered a presidency often occupied by the most admired person in the country, and always occupied by someone who lived in awe of the civilization that produced the presidency, until Donald Trump. This is what the collapse of a civilization looks like. The most ignorant person ever to appear on a presidential ballot, taking an oath that he could not possibly understand or ever follow. We Americans all have varying degrees of admiration for individual presidents, varying degrees of enthusiasm, positive and negative, about individual presidents. But even when we lived in full disagreement with a current president of the United States, we never feared him. And even when we lived in constant disagreement with a president of the United States, it remained effortless for most of us to retain our respect and even awe for the presidency itself. And that is what has died. When we pledged allegiance to the flag every morning at St. Brendan's Elementary School in Boston with a photograph of the President of the United States beside the flag, it felt the same, whether the president was a Republican or a Democrat. I don't know what they said in Catholic schools in America yesterday, in elementary schools or high schools, about the social media greeting the President of the United States gave to the world on Easter Sunday at 8:03 a.m. when he screamed the worst kind of profanity you can scream in print, threatening to destroy every power plant and every bridge in Iran, thereby promising to commit a war crime while ridiculing the religion of the people he intended to kill with those bombs. I don't know what they could have said in those schools.
Let's start with MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid reporting from Dubai, our White House reporter Akayla Gardner, former Pentagon and State Department official Elisa Ewers of the Council on Foreign Relations, and former Undersecretary of the Army during the Trump's first term. Retired Navy Admiral Jim McPherson, thanks to you all. Inzamam, to you first. This clock is ticking. The threats are escalating from the president. What is the status right now?
Yeah, we're 10 hours away from President Trump's deadline, his ultimatum, and whilst there is some hope of a potential ceasefire peace agreement being reached, that hope is diminishing pretty rapidly, it's fair to say. Laura, we started off today with some positive notes, hearing from the Iranian ambassador inside Pakistan. He said that Pakistan positive and productive endeavors in goodwill and good office to stop the war is approaching a critical, sensitive stage. Stay tuned for more. That felt pretty optimistic. And then throughout the day today, we've just constantly seen messages coming through from the president, now hearing from Vice President J.D. Vance, and also some of the conversations that I've been having directly with the Pakistanis. Remember, these are playing the mediator role. These are essentially the guys who are handing the messages between the US and Iran, working alongside Turkey and Egypt to come up with this framework, which they put to the US and Iran to essentially get a ceasefire, to stop the fighting and also open up the Strait of Hormuz so that oil could pass through. But today, they're feeling pretty optimistic. One Pakistan government official who's close to the peace talks that I've been speaking to, he didn't want to share his identity given the sensitivities of these talks. He said to me that whilst the talks between US and Iran are ongoing, there is no hope anything will be confirmed today following US-Israeli attacks on Iran and Iranian attacks inside the Gulf states. It's looking very unlikely, but Pakistan continues to try for peace and stability in the region.
Like this regime in Iran, blowing up, these power plants and bridges is actually going to create sympathy for the regime in Iran and is not going to cause them to collapse.
General, as we mentioned, we're now less than 9 hours away from the president's deadline. So what kind of plans is the Pentagon likely making? What kind of scenarios are you watching for? And do you think that the president is actually listening to the military lawyers that David was just referring to?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say we're at a point where, and I have opposed this since the beginning of the war, but when it comes to options, there are more options out there than just blowing up plants and so forth. I would much rather see U.S. ground troops introduced into this fight to be able to go in, fight, retain land, destroy the IRGC and other tasks than to see us kill innocent civilians. And so also, we've already talked about this, the diplomacy. There's been very little diplomacy. There's been very little of other countries getting involved to try to mediate and move things forward here. So there's so many other options that we have not exercised before going in to do something of this nature. And on your question on whether, go ahead.
Go ahead, General.
Yeah, on your question on whether or not this is going to be executed or not, I don't know. We'll see. It is my hope that the generals stand forward and say, look, if we're going after civilian targets, then, put your stars on the line, because the last thing you want to do is live the rest of your life knowing that you killed innocent civilians. We already do that when we kill innocent civilians and we don't mean to. And that carries very heavily on us throughout the rest of our lives.
I think the whole situation feels like a group of project where only one guy set a 10 hours deadline and threatens to burn the classroom if nobody agreed with him. That's basically the vibe right now. You have got Donald Trump throwing around affirmations like it's reality TV finale, while diplomats are the background trying to quietly glue the world back together, and some in the middle, countries like Pakistan and playing messenger probably wondering how they ended up in the group chat in the first place. But here's the serious part: this is not just political threat where deadlines like this get thrown around, especially in a conflict involving the US and Iran. It raises the temperature globally. Add in voice like JD Vance saying the ball is in Iran court, and suddenly it's starting to sound less like diplomacy and more like a high stakes poker game where nobody wants to fold the problems. This game, these chips are not money. They are human lives and regional stability. What really stands out is how quickly optimism collapsed. Early signals suggest there might be a path toward de-escalating with meditation effort involving Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. That kind of cooperation is fair and valuable, but within hours that hope faded as attack continued, and rhetoric testified that telling you something important when action on the ground contradict word at the label trust disappear fast. And without trust, peace talks are basically just scripted conversation, right? So now let's talk about the bigger issue, international law. When journalists start asking about violation of the Geneva Conventions, that's not a minor detail, that's a flashing red warning sign. Threatening civilization population is not just a controversial